People say America deserved to be destroyed. I came from North Korea as a former sex slave. My worth was not even $300. I had no family, I had no connection. I had no education, but when I came here, I worked hard and wrote 2 books. I have a son, I'm a mom, I have a citizenship now, I have the rights as a human being. And that's why I believe in the possibility of America. I really think that if you really know what's happening in the world, you can never hate this country. You can never fantasize destroying this country.
But some societies, like Koreans, they might have a God complex, but they don't have a history of oppressing another group of people.
Each other, right?
Are you fucking out of your mind?
What the fuck?
What do you mean?
You don't think Asians had they didn't oppress?
Koreans didn't have slaves. We didn't fly.
Did Koreans have slaves?
Yeah, Google that.
Yeah, because I think that's fucking wrong. Loud, you piece of shit.
Get close. All right. Korea had the longest unbroken chain of slavery of any society in history. Holy shit.
You guys are fucking scumbags.
Hi, my name is Ellen. I'm Korean American. I came from Korea when I was 8 years old, got on a plane by myself, not speaking a word of English, didn't know white people were real. For me, it was huge culture shock. My parents had already immigrated, so I was joining them. I like to be identifying myself as a Korean American woman. And
cheer up. I'm 100% Hindu Indian American. I was born in Brooklyn. My parents are from India. I personally just describe myself as American. I find, like Vince said, the hyphenated American thing, I think it's by definition divisive when you're dividing the identity. I prefer to call myself American. I don't call myself Indian American, Asian American, though when people ask, like, oh, well, what are you? I'll say, well, I'm of Indian heritage, but I was born in Brooklyn.
I think assimilation is not just a great thing, it's a necessary thing. No society can hold together where people have nothing in common, they don't speak the same language, they don't practice the same things. And, you may look at something like just food habits or what you eat and think that's fairly frivolous. But the truth of the matter is that on a broader level, when we're talking about more big picture things, differences in race, culture, religion, all these things, people have fought wars, violent wars, killed each other over these things for thousands of years. If America is to hold together, assimilation, not just good or bad, necessary. I don't think it's going to be possible for America to survive as a stable, functioning society if people don't, to some degree, say, well, here's what we're going to commonly agree upon.
But who gets to choose it?
The majority culture, I suppose.
And what's majority culture?
The people with power.
And who's people with power?
Who's people with power?
White people.
Well, I don't know if that's...
I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
White people. It's okay.
I don't know if that's necessarily so true. I mean,
wait, can you unpack?
I don't think a particularly white, quote unquote, interest controls things like
in America,
pop culture.
Do you believe white supremacy exists?
I think there are people who believe in it. I think there's people who all believe that their race is superior.
The Pittsburgh Steelers are Super Bowl champions.
After he was named the MVP of Super Bowl 40, Hines Ward spoke of how he had always been an underdog.
Never in my wildest imagination would a kid out of Forest Park, Georgia, not too tall, not too fast, win the Super Bowl MVP. Speechless.
But when Ward came into this world, he was more than an underdog. He was an outcast. Ward was born in 1976 in Seoul, South Korea, to a Korean mother and an African-American father serving in the U.S. Army. In Korea, children of mixed ethnicity have long been pariahs, shunned by mainstream society. As a result, biracial Koreans are usually poorer and less well-educated than pure-blooded Koreans. The women who bear these children are also subjected to harsh intolerance.
When my mom walked out in Korea, people would call her names, spit on her. I mean, that's how bad, in Korea it is. My mom always described me, they treat people like dogs over there.
It's still a very pure-blooded culture which goes way back in their history before the Korean War.
Janet Mincer runs an organization dedicated to alleviating the impact of discrimination in Korea and around the world.
It goes back to Confucian times, and then also the result of invasions of Japan when there were mixed-blooded children, which they resented at the time. If you're not pure-blooded Korean, you face discrimination.
Before Ward turned 2 years old, his parents relocated to Georgia, in large part because his mother wanted to escape the prejudices of Korea.
She knew the lifestyle that I would have would be harder in Korea rather than coming to the States and giving me an opportunity to have a better life. You know, I could be one of those kids over there right now, you know, not given opportunities, and I owe her everything for that.
So you don't believe in white supremacy?
Do you believe America is a white supremacist state?
No, not at all.
And not found.
No white supremacist state would even allow us to be doing this. I don't understand. It's a white supremacist. There's just KKK people walking. Actually, I go around New York City. I noticed that, I guess Brooklyn a little bit different. Most of the people here are not white, and they're doing their thing. So I don't understand.
What does doing their thing mean to you?
Going to work.
Are they making the same amount of money? Are they getting the same access to opportunities?
I think they're getting great access to opportunity.
Please, while the few at the top who don't represent our communities are profiting, there are massive disparities based on race, based on class, based on gender, based on all of these things that shouldn't exist.
Well, nobody denies that there's disparities or that.
Well, let's have Vince respond.
Or that, I think the question is, do they exist because of supposed white supremacy? And when I look at the fact that, virtually every corporation and institution bends the knee to diversity, celebrates every single Heritage Month, has all these programs, every single one toe the line for Black Lives Matter. I don't look at that I don't look at that and say conservative white people are in power in this country. As a matter of fact, I'd argue to a large extent, you can talk about, what race or whatever people are, but is a supposedly conservative white interest in power in America. I would honestly say I think it's the opposite of that. And build things in society and not constantly be fighting each other and at odds with each other.
Did you think the Japanese internment was a good thing? Because that was a real assimilation situation. You know what I mean?
No,
Do you recognize that the term assimilation has negative history and facts associated with that word? So we do have to be careful in how we choose, because assimilation for people of color have not been good to us historically. That's factual. So let me ask you.
We're discussing the model minority myth and the fact that
Japanese internment is a classic example of assimilating Asian Americans.
No,
so
it's not. It's a classic example of internment. I mean, they intern people.
Why?
Yes.
Why did they
Why
did they intern them? Because they saw them as other. Because they saw them as dangerous.
Not really. Well, yes, they saw them as dangerous.
It was a quiet Sunday at the U.S. Naval Base in Hawaii. America was at peace, and Pearl Harbor was at ease. People relaxed, oblivious to the firestorm that was about to engulf them.
The Japs caught us asleep Sunday morning. They didn't tell us they were coming. They were very rude.
In the skies above Pearl Harbor, swarms of deadly aircraft were zeroing in. Over 180 planes of the Empire of Japan were moments away from striking a brutal blow at America's naval power. They would turn a military safe haven into a killing zone. Within 3 short hours, Pearl Harbor was in flames, and America was at war.
Have you ever wondered, why did Japan attack the United States of America during World War II? The United States had a much stronger economy, and Japan did not have many chances of winning. The answer lies in the Second Sino-Japanese War. It all began 10 years ago. China had been in relative stagnation for a long time, while Japan had started its modernization half a century ago and had a strong military. This had allowed Japan to make some expansion. Seeing China in a weak state, the Japanese military decided to continue with enlarging Japan's territory and occupied the Chinese province of Manchuria. China did not have a strong army and could not offer much resistance. The Japanese proceeded with expansion and took over Chinese territories bit by bit. In 1937, the Japanese seized some Chinese cities. By that time, the Chinese public had become outraged by Japanese expansion and demanded resistance. The Japanese then attacked the weak Chinese forces in the north and outflanked the Chinese defenses. This helped the Japanese to overcome the Chinese on the Yangtze, and they now approached Wuhan. The Chinese abandoned the city to the enemy. The Japanese proceeded with securing their position. They expanded their territory to the east and west, while the United States was opposed to Japanese expansion. The move into Indochina was the last straw, and the United States stopped selling oil to Japan unless it withdrew its forces from China and Indochina. To answer the question from the beginning of the video, Japan went into war with China, but China did not surrender. So Japan had to escalate the war more and more. Eventually, this caused the United States to embargo Japan, and the only acceptable way out of the situation for Japan was attacking the United States. Would Japan going to war with America finally turn the war in China's favor? Well, it is a long story.
Razor Tojo, Japan's Adolf Hitler. So let's get right to it. Contrary to popular myth, Japan's version of Adolf Hitler was not the Emperor Hirohito, but rather its infamous war minister Hideki Tojo. But who was this man that so few outside of Japan even know of? When Hitler's war erupted in Europe, Tojo pushed the prime minister for an alliance with the Nazis. He had briefly served as military attaché to Germany in the 1920s. Tojo admired Hitler's accomplishments and the Third Reich's war state. Tojo was tried by the International Military Tribunal for War Crimes and found guilty of waging unprovoked wars of aggression in violation of international law and ordering, authorizing, and permitting inhumane treatment of prisoners of war. Hideki Tojo was sentenced to death and hanged by the neck until dead in 1948.
I don't think people understand the twist in Yamamoto's story. From Harvard to Pearl Harbor, let's dive in. Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, wasn't your typical Japanese admiral. He studied at Harvard. That's right, from 1919 to 1921, he roamed the same halls as future American leaders. Fluent in English, he understood Western culture deeply, but it was his strategic genius that defined him. Learning from America and Europe, Yamamoto spearheaded Japan's naval innovation. Yet, despite his Western ties, he believed that Japan had no choice but to confront the U.S. In 1941, his audacious plan struck Pearl Harbor, dragging America into World War II. This Harvard graduate had transformed from student to adversary in a dramatic twist of fate.
Told in no uncertain terms by the government that if we hired anyone who is not a permanent resident of the United States, have either a green card or a citizen, that I would go to prison. Because the presumption if somebody's not a permanent resident is that they will leave the United States and take the rocket technology from SpaceX to potentially to countries that would cause harm to the United States. Pretty, solid reasoning, I think. A few years ago, the Biden administration decided to sue SpaceX for failing to hire asylum seekers. So we're told on the one side that if we hire anyone who's not a permanent resident, we go to prison. Now we're told if we don't hire asylum seekers who are not people who have been granted asylum, seekers, they aspire to asylum, they're therefore not a permanent resident, but if we don't hire them, we also go to prison. So, I mean, that seemed to be insane and unfair.
Also, like my experience, my mom is from Japan. She immigrated to America. So I do truly feel that I am a part of the Asian American experience where, at home, it's a Japanese household. It's a Japanese culture because I was predominantly also raised by my mom too. And then also we happen to live in America. And I think there is a very unique perspective in that. As well as I'm a proud Asian American, I'm a proud Black American too.
Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II is one unresolved issue that continues to strain relations between the two countries. However, all these decades later, the Japanese government still tries to whitewash its wartime atrocities. Now, fresh evidence has been found that should aid Seoul's efforts to corner Tokyo into facing reality. Lee Ji-won tells us more.
Women with faces full of fear are lined up against the wall. A man presumed to be a Chinese officer talks to them. This short 18-second video is of 7 Korean women sexually enslaved by the Japanese soldiers in Yunnan province, southwest of China around the end of World War II. It is the first ever video footage of Korean victims that has been found. The footage was taken by an American combat photographer just after the region was reclaimed from Japan by the Chinese. During World War II, an estimated 200,000 women, mostly Koreans, were kidnapped and forced to become sex slaves for Japanese troops. With only 38 Korean victims still alive, the research team stressed their determination to uncover this video evidence of Japan's sexual slavery so that there's a chance for the issue to be resolved within their lifetimes.
Motivated by vocal outcries from politicians and military officials, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, empowering the U.S. Army to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. He later formed the War Relocation Authority to establish 10 permanent camps, housing nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans, mostly from the western United States. 2/3 of those interned were native-born American citizens. With only 6 days to dispose of their possessions, residents were forced to sell their belongings and even their homes for small sums of money. Internment camps were often situated in isolated deserts, prone to harsh weather, and surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Despite these difficult living conditions, internees tried to establish a sense of community, creating newspapers, schools, churches, and farms. Even in the face of persecution, young men came forth to join the military. Nearly 33,000 Japanese Americans served during World War II, many of whom became highly decorated for their valor in battle. Yet as the war continued, public opinion worsened against Japanese Americans. Only 35% of the country thought they should be allowed home once the war was over. This sentiment kept the camps open for over 3 years. It would take over 40 years before President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, paying reparations to each victim of internment.
No payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
Chinese ancestry, who you basically say can constitute 10% of the population, will have to pledge loyalty to reunification in writing, otherwise we'll have to help them leave. You're basically calling for the ethnic cleansing of 2.3 million people in Taiwan.
No, you remember back in 1945, when Japan unconditionally surrendered, a lot of people in Taiwan who originally came from Japan, they were the rulers of Taiwan at the time, they stayed behind because of the magnanimity of the Chinese nation. Now, several decades later, they account for about 10% of the local population in Taiwan. Now, if you really do your homework, you will realize that those die-hard Taiwanese separatists include many of these Japanese
completely baseless
Chinese.
Claims, but okay.
Well,
but you would get rid of them. You would get rid of 2.3 million people.
Directly related to the fact that you live in New York, right? Yeah. And you're an Asian woman. There have been significant high crimes towards Asian women that were all over the news. Did that affect you? And what were your thoughts on that?
The government is telling us that it's Asian hate, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is actually that these people were mentally ill and they were let out.
Or both can be the issue, right?
Yeah,
it can simultaneously exist as issues.
You can't say that it's Asian hate and use that as propaganda.
Propaganda?
I feel like also to just say that these people are mentally ill is a kind of an ableist argument too, because there's plenty of people who are mentally ill who are not going out and killing like Asian people on the street.
All these attacks that you're seeing the videos of in San Francisco, New York City, newsflash, they're not being prosecuted as hate crimes. So the more correct way to look at it is what is the primary perpetrator of violence against Asians overall, right? Because if we talk about these videos, we have to count them in the statistics, and we're not doing that. And when we do that, we find, well, I'll tell you this, the plurality top perpetrator of violence against Asians, number one, it's not happening in rural America, and number two, it's not being done by white people.
So is it black people that are doing it? Like, is it the black and brown people that are doing it?
No, that's exactly
just inherently violent. Like,
just say it. I didn't say that. All I said was,
around it. Just say it.
And if it's not white people or Asian people, who is it?
All I said, I didn't say anything about inherently violent. All I said is that if it's
now you did.
If it's
no one accused you of that, and now you did.
It's a white.
So like your bias is slipping out there.
It's clear you want to say it. You should just say it.
Can anyone let me talk here?
When it comes to Asian hate, the perpetrator is not a white supremacist in New York.
Correct. That's all I'm saying.
So that's the
all
problem.
that I'm saying.
Like, we don't want to blame one race for violence when that's actually not true.
Is it white people? Is it white people?
It is white people.
Are these attacks happening
It is white
in
people. I literally looked up.
We're learning new details into a series of violent home invasions targeting Asian American families up and down Western Washington. Fox 13 News reporter Nia Wong joins us live.
In the meantime, we are learning more details about the violence that Johnson and his associates are accused of committing against Asian American victims.
Seen here in front of this Dodge Charger, flashing a wad of cash, and here, holding a semi-automatic rifle. Documents say Christopher Johnson took part in violent crimes, described as horrific and terrifying, targeting Asian victims, perceiving them to be, quote, weaker.
I'm thinking the Asians were targeted, and because of their language barrier, they are probably slower in reporting.
Allen court documents say in May of 2022, Johnson was part of this enterprise gang that tormented a family in Mount Vernon, zip tying them, including a 12-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. At one point, abducting the boy at gunpoint while still zip tied. And just months later, court documents show this same group murdered Ira Salk just feet away from her 7-year-old son in Everett.
It's a home invasion. But these masked gunmen are about to get a nasty surprise from the homeowner. The drama erupted at a home outside.
Chris Johnson and Kevin Thistle are accused of not only robbing her of her belongings, but of her life, with her race playing a factor.
And one of the modus operandi of this group, of course, was targeting Asian American families.
The attackers pistol whipped the 70-year-old father while demanding cash from his wife.
Blood all over his face, just horrible, my God.
They made off with $1,200 and their sense of safety.
They can't sleep during the night. They have to leave all that eye on. They are almost freaking out every day. Heard any noise from outside.
This is a brutal reality for dozens of Asian American families in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. Seattle police have tracked 14 home invasions between June and August.
Right now, everything you got, come out of everything.
We're not sure why the Asian community was targeted.
On Wednesday, Chief Adrian Diaz said 8 people were arrested and charged for the robberies. Among them, 32-year-old Tyrone Marr, 28-year-old DeMarcus Pate, and 30-year-old Javis Tubbs.
Death in downtown Seattle was shocking, and today loved ones will say goodbye to Ina Kwan, a pregnant mother that was killed in a random shooting last week.
Yeah, these are popular folks. Ina Kwan, a pillar of the community. She and her husband Sung own a popular bento house near Pike Place. That restaurant closed after the shooting, but Sung was hit in the arm, but Ina was shot several times. Doctors delivered their daughter, but the child unfortunately died. Court documents made it clear the Kwans never interacted with that suspect. This was a random act of violence. Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz says that suspect has a history of mental health issues.
Learning more about 2 teens who allegedly shot and killed an elderly woman at Costco in Tukwila this year.
Prosecutors charged Haji and Abdi with murder, robbery, and attempted robbery. But Haji, the accused shooter, left the country on a flight days after the murder and hasn't returned.
I do want to warn you here, this video is pretty graphic. It happened in Seattle's Belltown neighborhood right around dinner time. You see a woman walking on the sidewalk. She comes into frame right about here, and then the suspect comes up behind her, setting down the bags that he was carrying in order to use both hands to swing the baseball bat at her head. Yeah, the prosecutors say surveillance video then captured him grabbing a piece of pizza there and then going into his apartment, bat still in hand.
So 41-year-old Juantez Tullis was arrested the next day.
Prosecutors say there is some question of this being a hate crime at this.
Bruce Harrell made a pledge to work urgently to combat Seattle's violent crime. He says Seattle is dealing with the highest level of violent crime in 24 years. The mayor says SPD staffing levels are a concern.
The fact of the matter is I inherited a depleted and demoralized police department. we have lost a staggering number of officers over the past 2 years, nearly 350.
Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best officially will be retiring today after nearly 30 years with the department. Last month, she announced she's stepping aside. That announcement coming weeks after protests in the city with demonstrators and officers clashing night after night, as well as the city council's decision to make cuts to the police force and her salary. Chief Best joining us now live here this morning in an exclusive interview as we social distance outside the studio. Almost telling the future at that moment. I'm wondering, did the city let you down?
Well, I don't feel let down, Jake. You know, I feel like it's been some real challenges, also some real opportunities, and some good things have happened. But you know, as I said, when I decided I was going to retire and step aside, you know, it really was a good time to do that, to get some fresh eyes on it, maybe to start the conversation so that we could advance things and move things forward. And it was so important that we do that. When I was thinking about what I might want to say about those last days, what's most important? First and foremost, the men and women of the department who continue to show up every day and do great work and work really hard for this city. And of course, all of the people who live here, who've been very supportive and all the work that they've done.
One of the reasons that you said you'd step aside is you just couldn't bring yourself to cut rookie cops like that young gentleman, that African-American man who looks up to you. That seemed to be very close to you in your heart. Are you worried that people like him may see you as quitting and walking away at a bad time?
Yeah, you know, I think that the fact that I have decided to step aside and move on has actually helped the department. You know, people are paying attention now. They are laser focused on what is happening in public safety in the city. They are rising up and trying to make sure that they hold City Council accountable for the decisions that they're making. The discussion, as you know, has increased and intensified, and it was really important. And there may be a possibility that we're not going to have to lay off as many people here. So for that reason, I think it was a good thing. You know, it was necessary to do to shake it up, so to speak.
Interesting. Well, every night we see videos of riots. We see bottles being thrown at officers. Police officers are injured. What do you make of that? What do you feel when you see that? This is so disturbing to watch this day after day, night after night. That's got to be wearing on you.
It is disturbing to see, but you know, we are in a time of intense change, not just here, but all across the nation. These pictures aren't just Seattle or just Portland, but they're happening all over the country, as many people have called it, a reckoning, if you will. And we're in the midst of that, and we're a part of it as police. We're one of the highlights, so we have to know that there's going to be intense emotion behind what's happening. But it is, on the other hand, also really trying to go through these times. So we're trying to find a path forward that doesn't lead to violence, that doesn't lead to property destruction, that doesn't lead to people being hurt. And not everyone is doing that, but for those who are, they're wrong.
Is this a moment, a special moment and an important moment for activism in your mind?
I think it's a special moment in the sense that you can be heard. Activism and activists have always been around, but people had a closed ear and a closed mind, and didn't want to recognize and didn't want to hear and didn't want to be knowledgeable about what they were speaking, where they were coming from, the passion that they were speaking with. Now it's being heard.
But it's fun to watch. It's just fun to watch them.
It's good entertainment.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly.
Well, they're just, you know, it's interesting because I think Sunny is very intelligent, but she's ideologically captured.
Right.
You know, that's sort of, I think the other ones, there's a couple of the other ones, don't have to name any names, who are just very dull-minded. But I think Sunny's not one of them. I think she's smart but captured.
Sure. I think she came into it with an agenda.
Of course.
You know,
they do everything with an agenda.
Yeah.
You know,
she came into it seems, really wanting to paint me as someone that has been co-opted by the right wing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much research she had done into me. She claimed to have read my book twice, which is almost certainly not true.
Yeah,
because she was totally missummarizing.
When did the book come out?
February.
The odds are very low.
Very low, right?
Because very low.
Think of how many guests they have on their show, how much
many things
time
you have
she
to do,
has.
Family obligations. What is it, about 250 pages?
Something like that, yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, do you have an audiobook? available?
I do, yeah. I read it myself.
Maybe she did it at double speed.
Yeah.
Twice.
So I sounded like Ben Shapiro the whole time. Have you ever listened to Ben Shapiro on like 1.5 times?
No, it's got to be ridiculous.
Yeah, it's insane.
Things that I wanted to share with you. According to Pew Research, the net worth of white families in 2013 was $141,000. For black families, it was $11,000, even less than the $19,000 it was in 2007. According to economist Edward Wolf of the University of New York, excluding vehicles and other durables, the median black family worth is just $1,700, while 40% of black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Now I'd like to skip over to Dr. Seacrest.
I look at the Baltimore uprisings as more than just riots, right? I hate the idea when you say thugs and riots, right? White people riot as well. When y'all win Super Bowls 2 years in a row, y'all get off the hook. Don't make it seem like it's just Baltimore getting upset. So my 30-second answer is I feel the frustration of what's happening in the community, and I think it's a symptom. The uprisings are a symptom of a pressure that's been unaddressed for too long.
I'm offended by the language of uprising applied to people who are breaking into other black people's stores and looting them. This is a lack of values. And people who are destroying private property, destroying cop cars, in an uprising against what exactly? Against the black police chief, against a mostly minority police force, against the black mayor, against the black president, against the black attorney general, against against a city council that is 9 of 15 are black and all 15 are elected Democrats. What is the uprising against? What is
we're agreeing. We're agreeing. They're two different things. We're agreeing.
No, we're agreeing to two different things. We're not agreeing that there's not systematic racism because we're not in charge of the system, sir. In case you
all right. Can we?
Black people have never been in charge of any system.
Well,
we're not
actually, we have been. Take Baltimore.
No, we've never been in charge of
any
I finish?
System.
Tell me, what financial system are black people in charge of? What healthcare system are black people in charge of? What government system are black people in charge of?
I'm about ready to tell you.
What prison system are black people in charge?
I'm about ready to tell you.
I'm not talking about mayors. I already know that talking point, sir. I go on Fox News all the time as well. So let's not go there with that. I said, what system have we created? Have we implemented that we have been in charge of? Name one.
Is this why you don't like talking to black women, Larry Elder?
Wow. Baltimore. Freddie Gray a few years ago.
No. That's mayors. I'm not talking. I said system.
I'm going to tell you about this system if you allow me to finish my point.
I'm not talking about somebody elected and doing a job, sir. I asked what system did we create? What financial system?
Okay, let's talk about the system of one of the largest.
Let him say his point,
thank you. One of the systems of one of the largest cities in America, Baltimore. Freddie Gray died in police custody a few years ago. The mayor was black. The head of the police department was black. Number two.
It's not in charge of the system, but go ahead.
Number two person in charge of the police department was black. All the city council, Democrats, majority black.
Still not in charge of the system.
Wow.
That's a position.
6 officers charged, 3 of them were black. A judge before whom 2 of the officers tried their case, found him not guilty, was black.
Still not in charge of the system.
The city intendant of public schools was black. The county superintendent of public schools was black. The attorney general at the time, Loretta Lynch, is black, as was the president of the United States, was black. And yet,
still not in charge of the system. So I asked you a simple question, sir.
Well, Wanda Sykes said when Barack Obama got elected, how are you going to complain about the man when you are the man? Now, from the president to the attorney general to the state attorney to the mayor to the head of the police department to the commissions of the schools in the city and in the county to the majority of city council in that city, all of them are black. And you're still saying that we don't run anything?
So who's in charge of the system?
No. I said who created the system. I didn't say we didn't run anything. I challenged a lot of those black leaders, by the way.
So then when Martin Luther King said in 1966, I believe there could be a black president in about 40 years' time, then it really doesn't matter whether there's one or isn't. It's one because nothing changes. He was naive.
The system also
then.
killed him as well. Well, we know that the FBI and the CIA also killed him. That system. You realize that, correct?
Wow.
Usually white males.
One more time. They are usually white males because 60% of the country is white. However, they underrepresent in terms of the number of mass shootings. About 50% or so of the mass shootings in this country are committed by white people, even though white people are 60% of the population. They underrepresent. We overrepresent when it comes to hate crime, when it comes to mass shootings, when it comes to serial killings, when it comes to robberies, when it comes to virtually every category of violent crime. We overrepresent.
So what do white people do wrong? I'm gonna keep asking you that because I want.
It seems to me.
More than 1,000 Americans have been convicted in the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. About 350 trials are still pending, and the FBI continues its dragnet for suspects. The attack that stopped the count of the presidential vote triggered the largest prosecution in U.S. history. What is the evidence? We begin with the prosecutor in charge. U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves told us what drives the prosecution of January 6th.
Crime was severe. It was an attack on our democracy. Once you replace votes and deliberation with violence and intimidation, you've lost the democratic process. You've lost the rule of law. But it's also about the victims, the officer victims who were injured that day, and making sure we hold people accountable for the harm that they inflicted on the 140 officers who reported physical injury.
Matthew Graves has worked in the Bush and Biden Justice Departments. Now, as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, he's won more than 1,000 January 6 convictions and lost only 2 of the cases at trial. What is the best evidence that you've had?
The crimes that occurred that day are probably the most recorded crimes in all of our history. You also have the words of the defendants explaining what they were going to do or what they had done.
Took over the Capitol, overran the Capitol.
Evidence from the trials show many in the mob were determined to stop the count of the electoral vote that would certify Joe Biden's victory. They were enraged by President Trump's false claims of a stolen election. You must have felt strongly to drive 2,000 miles to Washington.
Yes, sir. I still feel very strongly.
Jared Hughes came from Montana. He's a married 39-year-old construction worker with a daughter and a grievance.
The way this country's headed, my paycheck, my wife's disabled, and it's been hell for us to try to make it with the tens of thousands of dollars of medical bills, and a lot of us see Donald Trump, the outsider, coming in and trying to help us out, No matter how I look at it, I share some of the responsibility for everything that happened that day, letting people in, being a part of that mob. I didn't personally fight any cops or engage with any officers, but I have a lot of family that are police officers. I have a tremendous amount of respect for police, and I did not like seeing them being assaulted.
We didn't see a lot of respect for police in that video.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, I'll hold my hand up and say I was wrong. I should not have been screaming at those cops. It's not something I'm proud of.
Others did much worse.
I became trapped. They pinned me against the door frame, and with my arms at my side, I couldn't mount any kind of defense.
Officer Daniel Hodges of D.C.'s Metropolitan Police defended an entrance known as the West Front Tunnel.
Someone was pinning me with a police shield, and another member of the crowd grabbed my gas mask by the filter in front and just started essentially punching me in the face while holding on to it, and then eventually ripped it off my head. And then he stole my riot baton out of my hands and beat me in the head with it.